Once upon a time, in a faraway land.
What are fairy stories?
The strange and wondrous place where nothing is as it seems.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest?
Fairy is a perilous land.
Before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well.
It is the place you visit
A world
in your
of
dreams.
myth and magic.
When the clock began to
The
chime
evening
midnight,
star sailed down through the
A
sky.
mysterious voice began calling to the sad
She
princess.
pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the
In a
small
trance,
porch
she
window.
followed the haunting
And peered
sound
into
of
the
a
hollow
winding
tree.
stairway to the top of the
You
tower.
can read along with me in your book.
waved her wand and said the magic words.
Let's begin now.
Well met, witches. Welcome once again to Storybook, Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. Joining the circle today is Flo, the trans folk witch. Flo, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Flo, the trans folk witch, as you just said. The same name on Instagram. I am an Ozark traditional witch based in northern Arkansas. I had a podcast of my own, but the public, people, internet, I deleted it. I have a blog. I just kind of float around the internet and say what I want when I want, and then I disappear for months at a time. I mostly practice within things that are regional to me. I'm a bioregional animist as well as an Ozark traditional witch. And I'm here to talk to you guys about Mother Redcap.
Wonderful. And I will say, I think you've been extra active on the socials lately. I've been enjoying that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Returning, we also have Dave Gaddy, the weathered wise man. Why don't you go ahead and say hi, Dave?
Hey, how are y'all today? It's good to see everybody.
Likewise, it's been a long time. Flo, you brought us a tale called Mother Redcap, as you said.
Yes.
And both Dave and I are unfamiliar with this tale. So would you be willing to have a little story time and tell it to us?
Absolutely. It's kind of difficult because she's not one figure. Like how if you were to read the Gospel of Witches or Aradia, there is a uniform idea of who this spirit is. So Mother Redcap, first of all, before I tell this little story, I wanted to give a little bit of history, if that's okay. She originally was a Cornish spirit. She was Cornish and then she was British. There's a Mother Redcap of Camden Town in England. Actually, it was Mother Redcape, but English, Americanization. Now it's Mother Redcap. A lot of Scots-Irish immigrants moved to the Ozarks, which is a mountain region in the south, but also the middle of the United States, between Missouri, Arkansas, and parts of Oklahoma. This Mother Redcap is, I don't want to say she's nothing like the ones in Europe, but she very much is named after certain people that actually lived in the Ozarks. Some of them, their names are Gwendolyn, just Gwendolyn, no last name. There's one, her name is Andrea. But yeah, she's very elusive. So one family may say she's Mother Redcap. Another family may say that she's the Lady in Red. Old Mother Red Cap. In some stories, she doesn't have a red cap. She just has red hair. The idea in the Ozarks that red hair is villainous and evil. Red-headed people don't have a soul. But my grandmother was a redhead, so I find that a little comical. But yeah, she isn't one being. So each family may have a different idea of who she is. They may have a different story. I was told several stories growing up that all kind of contradict with each other, but I've never really written them. I'm not a good writer when it comes to storytelling. My grandfather was. But one story that is written that I really, really enjoy, that I feel like truly encapsulates Mother Redcap, is by Brandon Weston, if you're familiar with him. He has Ozark Healing Traditions on Witchcraft. He has a website of the same name. He's written a book called Ozark Healing Traditions by Brandon Weston. He is a folklorist based out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. And he has, I believe, the only written document of Mother Redcap in the Ozarks that we have, other than ones that members of my coven have shared. So I would say this is the one that if you Google Mother Redcap, Brandon will come up. Or other than the Mother Redcap of Europe, who is way more popular. But yes, I'm going to read that for you guys. Okay. Once there was an old woman living up on a mountain who kept to herself mostly. The folks down in town all called her Redcap because of the little crimson hat she always wore. Some people visited her when they were sick because everyone around knew she could work the plants and heal any disease. One day, some of the leaders in town turned against Redcap, saying she was a witch who had cursed their cows to give blood instead of milk. Under the shadow of darkness, they crept up the mountain and grabbed the old woman right out of her bed. They took her down to the center of town, where they built up a big pile of logs and branches. They tied her to a post and set the bonfire ablaze. As folks screamed out the worst curses they could think of, much of the displeasure of the local preacher, the flames grew higher and higher around poor Redcap. Save yourself, the townsfolk cackled and laughed. But the old woman just smiled, and in a flash of smoke, she flew up high into the trees, escaping certain death. After that, no one in town talked about what they'd done, for fear or some secret shame. From then on, the friends of Redcap always took comfort when they saw a red-headed woodpecker light in a tree above them, and her enemies saw the presence of the bird as a sign that harm would surely befall them soon. So, Mother Redcap, she is obviously from this story alone. If you didn't know anything else about her and were just getting this story for the first time reading this book, you would know she's associated with red, and she is associated with the pileated woodpecker, or the pleated woodpecker, in quotes, as you would say in the South. So this animal, this woodpecker, is one that you may have seen. It's throughout all of the North America. It has a black back and wings, and a white stomach, and a red head with like a mohawk. And the idea is that she was dressed like that. She wore a black cape and a white gown and had a black bonnet or hat. So from this story, although it's not really cohesive amongst all families, like the one I was taught, she had a black or a red bonnet instead of a red cap. I've also heard of her just having red hair. I've heard of people saying that she was a, in quotes, redskin, meaning an indigenous woman, very racially charged. So there are many different ideas of who Mother Redcap is. But for me, within my coven system, she's all of it and none of it. She's not really a witch mother, like all would say. She's not really a goddess. She's more of a person, a saint, a shade, actually, would be the proper term. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. There was a little bit of an echo, so I was like, oh no, I hope I didn't cut out. Yeah, she's just this elusive figure that has so much history, yet so little, because in the Ozarks, there is this belief that, first of all, a lot of people in the early Ozarks were illiterate. So there was no written folk tales until Vance Randolph. We were like a decade or two behind the rest of the United States in every way. Women were not able to work here or get an education way after it was already legal for us to in our state. So it's important to know that the most folk tales, especially Mother Redcap, were just shared vocally by word of mouth. Other than Vance Randolph, who I think wrote a story, he's a very famous folklorist that writes about the Ozarks and Appalachia, despite not being from either of those regions, which, not to drag him, he's dead. So don't really want to talk bad about him, but wasn't a huge fan, not a huge fan of him. But we have Brandon Weston now, who is a modern folklorist who is trying their best to take all of these folk tales that they grew up with or they've encountered since studying folklore and giving us little modern Ozark traditions. And I really like that. Even though this story that I just read was not entirely like the one that I grew up with, it's written way more beautifully than I could have ever done.
Is this the only story that he collected about Mother Redcap that you know
Yes. That he's written about? Yes. I've actually been meaning to ask him, but I've forgotten. I'm sure he has many more, but he's not a trad witch. He's more focused on the healing aspects and the more nature-based aspects. That's not really the witch folklore isn't really his cup of tea, but surely I'm sure he knows more. But for me, I grew up not necessarily calling her Mother Redcap. This is where the folklore turns into like my personal beliefs. So like take your little scholarly hat off and put on your little folktale hat. I can't confirm or deny the things that I'm about to say. It's just what I believe. I believe that she was Gwendolyn, because there was a woman in my part of the Ozarks that was believed to be a witch. She had red hair. Sometimes she had a red bonnet. Everyone, like my grandmother said that she used to lie in high school and elementary and tell people that she like grew up with her or like her mother was best friends with this witch. And she was very kind of a real person. And she does apparently have a grave, which I've never seen, but there is a grave of hers in Batesville, Arkansas. Never tried to look for it. Don't know her last name. It'd just be Gwendolyn, you know? But she is, to me, Mother Redcap. And I call her Miss Gwendolyn. I call her Mother. I call her Lady in Red. She's not a spirit that traditionally has been venerated or worked with, in quotes. I don't really use that terminology for myself. But this idea of this spirit, this person, is similar to a witch mother. If someone were to be like, oh, do you have a witch mother? Like, yeah. But that's more of like a European capital T traditional witchcraft idea to me. She's more of a human who may or may not have relations with the devil, depending on whoever you're speaking to, whatever folklore they have. There are stories that I've heard of her going to the woods and dancing with the devil, and how she doesn't have hair, she's bald. So her red cap conceals her baldness, which I'm also bald. Whenever I first started my initiation, I was diagnosed with alopecia. So I connect with her on that level. I feel like the idea of wearing a veil and no one can see your bald head except for the devil himself just really adds this layer of mystique and power to my own spiritual practice. But I think that she has this. It's so interesting to me how you have spirits like Diana, Aradia, Frau Hala, or Holly, or however you say it. These spirits are goddesses, and they're proper witch mothers. They are not just witches themselves, but creators, mothers. And this Mother Redcap, as we call her, is not a mother at all. In fact, she was known to help people with abortion through medicinal herbs. So, like, why do we call you Mother Redcap? I don't know. I've heard this Mother Redcap, Mother, Witch Mother, all of these terms for her, but she's not a mother in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's so interesting. I've always wondered where that comes from. If that's just what we say because that's what she was called in the English versions of Mother Red Cape. I don't know. But I've just been so interested in how she is something and she's also not something. And she is a goddess within the Ozarks, basically, but she's not because she was a human. And I have so many beliefs about her. I could talk about her for hours, but
Yeah, I wonder if the mother attribution could even be age related, like traditional.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because she's been called Old Mother Redcap. But also, I've heard people that I know personally say that their family has described her as a beautiful young woman. And to me, the idea in Brandon's story where she turns into the woodpecker and flies up into the sky, I feel like she's a shapeshifter. She may be an old lady, and she may also appear as a beautiful young woman who lures men in, as the tales in England are. In England, she was a prostitute. But I've always enjoyed that, although that never made it to the Ozarks. It's just, she's this all-encompassing spirit. And no one talks about her because there's no one's really paved the way to work with her. There's not a gospel of the Ozark witches. There's not a book about Mother Redcap. And maybe I'll write one day. Maybe I'll write one. But right now, I don't know. I feel like the secrecy just kind of gives me that little extra something, you know?
Would you think of her perhaps as like a witch ancestor in that sense, as opposed to a mother?
I would
or a
say
deity?
she is the first witch of the Ozarks.
Nice.
And I don't do this, but I guess like if anyone listening is Indigenous, you wanted to take it back to like the First Nations, you know, she has been associated with Indigenous people, although it was in a racist way. You could reclaim that and say that she was an Indigenous woman. So she truly was the first witch of this land, or the first spiritual practitioner, which wouldn't really be a term you'd use. But yeah, there is a lot of Osage, which is an indigenous group that was removed from the Ozarks, Osage and Quapaw groups, those tribes. There was a lot of influence. There was also the idea of the chief wearing a red headdress from red birds, maybe cardinals, I'm not sure. So there's also that connection and the mysticism surrounding the color red, specifically on the head. I've never seen or heard that being tied to her, but I wouldn't be shocked. There's also a fear of Indigenous people in some groups of the Ozarks, you know, very Protestant Christian groups where, oh, they're pagan rituals, the Indigenous pagan rituals, oh, they're demonic, you know, very playing up the fear of people of color. And then associating Mother Redcap with them, I could very well see there being ties with the color red being evil and also associated with Indigenous people, not just because of them calling them that based on skin color, but just from the chieftain heads or the war sign, symbolism of the color red and blood and violence. There's a lot there, but I don't want to say that that's necessarily true because, you know, I'm not a historian or a folklorist,
right.
But if I were, also there's no record.
It's like exciting and intriguing possibilities, or like intriguing things to ponder and study. Yeah. And could be sensical with this idea of a conflation then with a figure that had already been talked about in Europe and in England, the like Mother Red Cape of Camden Town. And so if there already was, I guess what I could say, an archetype of that, and then the local legends becoming conflated in a way.
Yes, and on top of that, you have the red cap mushroom, which again, which is associated with witches and visions, dreams, flying, lunacy, the devil, especially in Europe and the European Mother Red Cap. You have the, are they called red caps? There's a type of fairy in Ireland that was believed to actually be, it was actually believed to be the personification of that mushroom. So I feel like she has ties there. Again, you can't say she does or doesn't because there's no record.
But one of the things that I thought about too is if you look at Amanita muscaria, which is the red cap mushroom, I mean, it's very beautiful and very alluring, but it's very dangerous, very poisonous. It can be worked with, but you work with caution and respect. Yeah. And listening to you talk about Mother Redcap, I hear the same thing. I hear very dangerous, but also very alluring, very need to be approached with caution.
And it's also interesting to me how mushrooms, they are from decay and death. and things that are dying and old. And then there's old Mother Redcap, who was somewhat considered a poisoner in Europe, and killing men, poisoning men. And it's just very like, oh, is she using the mushroom? Was she poisoning men with mushrooms? And this is why they associated her as a witch. Was she a real human instead of just being a folklore? That's just so interesting. And then you have Mother Redcap of Camden Town. There's a bar named after her. If you Google her, it'll be the first thing that pops up. There's so many articles about her. You even sent me one on Instagram, and you're like, is this the story? And I was like, no, kind of, no. But yeah, she is all over. And a really interesting, the first time I ever heard of her outside of an Ozark context was actually a few years ago. I knew nothing about the Mother Redcap of Camden Town or England. To me, she was just something my grandfather would tell me to keep me from going outside at night. Don't go outside. Mother Redcap will get you. She'll swoop down from the trees and she'll take you up into her cloak and she'll eat you. She was associated with eating children and eating babies and like stealing youth from people. And I would watch the movie Hocus Pocus with this redheaded witch sucking the soul out of these virgin children. And I'd be like, oh my God, she's going to get me. I loved Hocus Pocus, but I think that there's this, I lost my train of thought. There's this idea of Mother Redcap just being so deadly and so beautiful and so old. She's like so many other spirits. But what I was saying, the first time I ever heard of her outside of an Ozark context was reading The Black Toad by Gemma Gary. So I don't know if you're familiar, but in the book, The Black Toad, is it The Black Toad? Yeah, it's The Black Toad. She has Mother Redcap, Mother Blackcap, Mother Greencap. And this is like this triple spirit. Whether they're one spirit, three different spirits, I don't know, but they're the three different tracks of magic. So green, healing magic, red, seductive magic, black, cursing magic, the three spirits of witchcraft. The idea of that to me was just like, oh my gosh, if this is where my Mother Redcap came from, do we have a green cat? Do we have a black cat? And then I learned from Gemma Gary that it was originally cape, not cap. And the English language was just like, oh yeah, it's a cap. No, they're actually capes. They're supposed to be wearing capes with hoods. And I just, it's so interesting to see how we've evolved from cape to cap to a redheaded lady to a bald lady to a lady with a red bonnet, which is actually probably, I've never heard her Lady Red Bonnet, but traditionally, if she was a real person in the Ozarks, women mostly wore bonnets. So she probably was a bonnet wearer. It was probably a red bonnet. But I prefer her to be bald. I think that this evolution, if you could call it that, because I'm sure the people in the Ozarks that first came here believing in her maybe didn't even know that she was a European spirit. Maybe that's just a coincidence. I don't know. We see that across many cultures, all goddesses of love are associated with Venus, despite not being colonized by Rome. Well, at least not all of them. A lot of goddesses of love are associated with roses, despite them not necessarily being syncretized with Aphrodite. You see that in indigenous folklores. You see that in Irish folklore. It's just, we all come to the same conclusions. So it's interesting to think about what her history truly is. Yeah, she is what she is. She's encapsulates so much, but she's also so secret.
And I think that falls along the lines. I'm from North Carolina, so from the South, and a lot of the legends, so to speak, are kind of culminations of the cultures that have come together. So you may have Scots-Irish, German, all of that in one area, and you start to see kind of like a cauldron full of information that's kind of compiled into one being. I mean, it's just like I've seen that a lot with the stories my grandma told back in North Carolina, that some of the stuff that you would think would be Scottish legend or Irish legend becomes something totally different based on the locality.
Yeah. It's Americanized. It's It's a melting pot, just like our country. And it's really hard, I feel like, to talk with people from Europe and you're telling them you're like, this is my mother red cap, and they're like, what are you talking about? That's not at all, like, I've never heard about any of this. And I feel that way, like, with a lot of spirits that we have in not just the Ozarks, all of the United States, the idea of the devil being at the crossroads. That's more American. That comes more from hoodoo and the villainization of Black people and their religious beliefs whenever they came from Africa. So it's just like, there's so much mixture, there's so much mixing of culture. And then that gets into, with Mother Redcap, cultural appropriation, which again, like, no one's really working with Mother Redcap other than my coven that I know of. And I'm not very public about her, so maybe there are and I just don't know about them. But to my knowledge, like, if people were working with her more at the level they are Hecate, I feel like we would see a lot of people that are calling her an indigenous woman and approaching her as if they are indigenous themselves. It would just be there's a lot there, and I'm glad that she's not that popular. But also, I really wish she were more popular, because no one knows who I'm talking about when I talk about her. And all they know is from Brandon Weston, which, so thankful. I love Brandon's book. I love his work. But yeah, she's very, I don't know. She is more than just this little lady. She is the woodpecker. She is the Ozarks itself. She is the mother of these mountains and just of all witches. Yet she's not. She was just a human, not a goddess.
So I will ask you this though. To have that fear instilled in you as a child. Don't go out. Mother Redcap will get you. What drew you to work with her?
Yeah.
Or to initiate that
What's really weird about that? Yeah. At first I was just like normal trad witch, just like the devil. And then I just was like, everyone has this witch mother. I was like, who is this? I don't have a Hecate. There's not a Diana here. And I'm very much focused on keeping my practice within my own ground, my own part of the world. So I wasn't really interested in being like, yeah, Diana, Aradia. I feel like I needed this woman figure to kind of balance out my practice. But I didn't look too much into it. I knew of Mother Redcap. I was just like, yeah, it's just a story. Like, I was scared of her. And then I went camping with my then boyfriend. And a woodpecker was coming and like knocking all through the night, just pounding on this tree by our tent. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to scream. I could not sleep. It was awful. And when we woke up that morning from not sleeping, I unzipped the tent and there were 4 woodpeckers just sitting on a branch. And to me, 4 is like kind of her number. I've never really like gotten anything like that from her stories or anything, but I've always just in my head been like, 4. Like, that's an evil number for some reason. And that just really clicked with me. I was like, oh my God, there's 4 woodpeckers. And I thought of Mother Redcap and I was like, it just clicked in I don't think that was really a sign from her. I'm very like, I don't know. I'm very superstitious and a witch and all that, all these trigger words. But I'm very skeptical. I didn't want to be like, yeah, she's calling me. This goddess chose me. I'm the chosen one. I don't mess with that. So I was just like, oh, how weird. Not to say it wasn't a sign from her or push my glasses up. But it wasn't really a sign from her. It just happened. And I really thought about her a lot. And I was like, yeah, like I've always known about her and I'm a witch now. So let's just see where it goes. And then I read this book, which I can't say the title of it. It's written by a friend. It's not been released yet. So zip, 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 zap, zipping my lips. But it's about conjuring the witch's shade, conjuring the shade of a witch. And it was written by a dear friend, and they talked about the witch of Endor within the Bible. And they had a very beautiful ritual kind of taken from the Key of Solomon, but also not, very biblical in nature, very folk Catholic, calling upon Jesus and Saint Michael and all that, and like threw all that away. Not my cup of tea. But you conjure the witch's shade, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to conjure the shade of Gwendolyn. I'm going to conjure this witch's fetch, this woman, the perverted part of the soul. So in my idea, the soul has three parts. You have your heavenly self, your heart, which is like the mid-self, and the fetch, which is like the sin within you. The witch's, like your inner child, or whatever you want to call it. I see her shade as being the witch herself. So to me, conjuring the witching shade is quite literally necromancy. Despite her being somewhat divine and all-encompassing, it was necromancy. It's calling on the spirit of a dead woman, a dead witch who may or may not have been a person. It just really clicked with me because I had all the tools in front of me. I saw these 4 woodpeckers that are associated with her. I grew up knowing everything about her and being scared of her. I'm now a witch. I was just thinking about the idea of a witch mother. I had just been initiated under the devil. Everything was clicking into place. And then I found my friend's book that they shared with me before it's been published a few years ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the ticket. Let's go for it. And here I am. My whole coven, I've crafted a whole coven of friends who also now work with her. And she is the leader of our coven. And there are witch ancestors within our coven who are there spiritually when we're treading the mill. It's just she's a person, she's a shade, she's a spirit, she's tangible, but she's also the mountains of the Ozarks themselves. It's very neither here nor there.
And I listen to you talk about her, and I hear a lot of what it almost sounds like with the kayak in Scottish tradition.
I'm not familiar.
She's an old woman who is essentially she's a creative.
Oh, is she like with sewing?
So when she's also a goddess of winter. So listening to a lot of what you're talking about with Mother Redcap kind of brings back that memory or that recollection of the kayak and some of the other like you said, the Scottish and the Irish goddesses and right, being
minimized to be just a human.
And then also, like I said, I go back to my southern roots, and the wise women of the South have always been called mother. And I think of that exactly.
And you have like a granny woman.
You have your mother this and mother that, and they're the leaders of the community.
And the church, and also they're accused of being the witches because they're widows. They're old. They're scary. They're spooky. They're outspoken, which women should not be. So it's they're the holiest and the most heretical. So in the Ozarks, the idea of the witch is that she is someone in the church. She's not just of the devil and like evil. She is a member of the community. And she is actively working against the community. So there is this fear of everyone at church. Everyone at church is against you. Everyone could be a witch. And if you have like OCD or something, that could very much like, oh, I'm so scared. And we never had witch trials in the Ozarks. But I also fully believe that people have been ran out of town before. Because I've heard stories of like queer people feeling like they've been ran out of town because a local church found out that they did drag. So they were cross-dressing. So they were kicked out of town, not really like formally like dragged out of their house and kicked out, but just kind of ostracized. And who wants to live in a small town where everyone knows you and they're mean to you? You have to leave. And this goes back to the idea of queer people from the South transplanting to the West. to Los Angeles, California, Seattle, and in the Ozarks, whenever you're casting out spirits like demons or illness or sickness, you cast it to the west, where all of the villainous, the evil, the demonic people, the queer people are. In fact, there is this very deep fear of queer people in the Ozarks that is somewhat in the folk magic. So, like, you have this, I have it right here. No, maybe not. It's a queer dollar. It's a dollar bill, a $2 bill. Right. They called it the queer dollar. So the idea was that someone who was a prostitute would pay with these $2 bills. So, like, if you go to, like, in the $2 bill, it became very popular after the Civil War. So you would go and buy your Coke at the pharmacy with a $2 bill, and everyone's like, "Oh, she's a stripper." About it.
That's where the phrase
or she's a drag queen. She's queer.
I mean,
yeah, exactly. So, and this idea of it being evil and of witches and of the West, because I think California, Washington, one of them, like, made the $2 bill. But this fear of the West, this fear of the New Age, liberal people, different people, women in church, it's all wrapped up together, and it's all associated with Mother Redcap. And if she was a real person, she would have been one of these people that are being villainized.
Who you don't understand, or what you don't understand.
Yeah.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the things that Mother Redcap was attributed to doing. So in the story that you told us, the first thing we're told is that she turns the cows, or she curses the cows to give blood instead of milk. And that seems in line with definitely the early US beliefs about witchcraft. I'm not sure if that goes back to the old world as well too. But that is one of the attributes that often would spark fears of witchcraft.
Funny, when Brandon wrote that was actually the first time I had ever heard of her doing that with cows. I had heard of her stealing eggs from chickens. I've heard of her souring milk. I've never heard of the blood connection, although that does not surprise me at all, given red.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I've heard all things, but I've not heard about the blood. I've heard of her eating children. I've heard of her making baby oil, which is now actually a thing you can buy at the store, baby oil. But traditionally it would have been oil actually from a baby, like an essential oil. But yeah, that's actually something that I use myself to consecrate tools, is baby oil, because same name, same thing. But she is
Aaron, you've got the same visual that I do. Squeezing the baby until the oil drips out.
The idea of taking a baby and blending it, essentially, or boiling it to get an oil from it that you could bottle is just such a beautiful visual. So to actually put that within my practice.
Or like in the sequel to Hocus Pocus being like, girl, you could just buy this at Walgreens.
Yeah.
So like a more essential version of the baby flying unguent or something.
Yeah, this idea of the witch being this scary, like, monster, not even just a woman in the church, which is what the witch is always depicted as in the church. The idea of her eating people, cannibalism, like the church didn't really do that itself by eating the blood of Christ and the flesh of Christ. Like, it's very, the thing they're calling evil is the exact same thing that they're doing. Yeah, it's really interesting because before the blood turned to milk, which, like, I'm not shocked at all by Brandon saying that that's the story that he was told. But she was more associated with just ruining someone's, like, livelihood, their crops, their food, their milk, their children, the things that abundance, money. She ruined those things. She also was known to be a shapeshifter because she turned into the woodpecker. And I don't really have any stories about her teaching witches to shapeshift or to fly or leave their body. I don't have any of that. There's nothing, no connections with her and brooms that I know of. But to me, that's like in my head. It just makes sense that
Mhm.
she does those things. Um, and I do those things with her. More specifically, shape shifting. That's something that I really heavily associate with her. Um, and then there's the idea that she is the woodpecker, not that she is like, not that the woodpecker is like her familiar or symbolizes her. She is. She turned into the woodpecker. So then you have that like whole animist idea. She is the spirit of the woodpecker. Um, yeah, there's just wow, so much.
Right. That
Well,
story almost goes through multiple story types where finally, when you get to the piece about her becoming the woodpecker, it's as if it's one of those origin myths, which ends with, and this is why now woodpeckers peck, or something like that, like
Yeah.
this is why now we have woodpeckers. But even before then, it's a bit like a saint hagiography with the crowd persecuting possibly an innocent
Mhm.
person, and how they're killed or martyred, and the miraculous thing that happens to them to save them from this martyrdom. So yeah, it seems to go through multiple types of familiar stories as
I was
well.
actually thinking the way that the woodpecker tends to add a little bit of an annoyance.
Mhm.
And like you said, you didn't sleep all night because of four woodpeckers. Um, I could see that associated with
Yeah,
Mother Red Cap. Just one more thing to bother the townsfolk.
yeah, very list some because like the story said that Brandon told, some people saw it as a blessing, like, oh, she's my friend, she's visiting me.
Right.
This beautiful woodpecker. Because they are very beautiful, but
Yeah.
also if it's dark and this they're pretty big, especially actually, forgive me, I should have said this way earlier. The traditional woodpecker that she was associated with was this other type of bird that is no longer it's extinct. It's an
Oh,
ancestor
wow.
to
Oh,
this
really?
pileated woodpecker that we associate her with today. So it was traditionally called in folklore the oh my God bird or the oh dear Lord bird, because that's what people called it when they saw it, because it was huge. It is, if you Google that, like the oh dear Lord bird or whatever, it is like the size of an eagle, but it's a woodpecker. Yeah, it's very scary. So I see it being tied to witches. Um, but of course, like it's extinct. So the modern day woodpecker, same color scheme, same appearance, just a lot smaller, but they're still pretty big, and still very scary if you're not expecting them to just come out of the sky. But yeah, to see them first thing in the morning was very terrifying, but also kind of reassuring. Um, because I'm a witch now. So my relationship with spirits like that I'm not scared of the dark like I was when I was a good little Christian. Um, yeah, it's weird how the things that scare Christians are the things that witches feel most comfortable with. The idea that once you are initiated, you are now considered one of those evil spirits.
Mhm.
You are like the fairies, for example, will be nicer to a witch than a churchgoer. Or the idea that the devil is the father of the witches, not necessarily the tempter or the uh, abuser or torturer of them as they would be a Christian. So it's just very, your relationship changes when you change. Yeah. Right
I think
now
that's a
I'm
very
trying to get
deep, that's a very deep statement that you just said.
really.
Yeah, your relationship changes as you change. I think you can, I
Hmm.
mean, that's powerful.
Yeah, and it's also just part of initiation. If you
Hmm.
go through any sort of initiation, no matter the tradition, you are changing. You're spiritually and sometimes physically changing. Um, and we change as people, always. But joining a new religion, especially,
Hmm.
you take on a new outlook on the world. Um, and I feel like the spirits see that. So the way that they treat you will change as well. Um, yeah, and then also being trans, that works in there somewhere, somehow. um, but yeah, I think there's just there is this change in the culture surrounding her from who she was in England to who she is here in the Ozarks to who I personally perceive her as, to how a Christian may perceive her and her tales. There's just all of these different ways that a spirit can exist, I guess. So
I like the idea of Mother Red Cape actually being bald, because then it's like whether it's red hair or a bonnet or a cap, it's essentially all the same. You know, that's the covering that she's using for her.
And if you're seeing her in the cover of night in the dark, you can't really tell.
Right.
That's just, it's one of those things where it's like you're describing someone who committed a crime. You don't remember what they look like. They were wearing a cape or a hood. They may have had red hair. It may have been a hat. I don't really know. I just know that she turned my child into a vial of oil, and she turned all of my milk into blood. And she may have had red hair, so we're gonna run all the redheaded people in the village out of town.
That's another one. I don't believe I ever heard about lore, people actually saying that redheads don't have souls until I arrived to Texas a few years ago. Well, so I arrived to Texas a few years ago, and now I hear it almost frequently.
Yeah,
but I don't remember growing up with that.
That's a huge
in the South,
Southern thing.
It's like, because a lot of Irish people came to the South. And there was a hatred towards Irish people, and it's just there was some racism, but also not really racism because they're white. It was just, it's very like anti-immigrant. So red hair was seen as foreign, and also like red hair the color red itself was already feared. And then you had indigenous people who wore like the red chieftain hats. So like having red hair, it's all villainized. The idea of the fear of red, the fear of the color red. And then all of these communities, indigenous, Irish, they were all outcasts. So they all assembled and they shared beliefs, they shared stories, they shared religions. In the Ozarks, there are still very tight-knit communities that are Irish and indigenous. They may speak a recreated form of the Osage language, and they may also speak a little bit of Irish that they've learned both of these languages later in life because they're not taught modern day. But there are a lot of people trying to revive these cultures, the blending of those two cultures within the Ozarks. So I just find it super cool that Mother Redcap is both of those things. She is indigenous, she is Irish, she is Ozarkian, she is, yeah.
Well, and she's also an outcast.
Yeah, she is, and she's queer. Not really. I've never really heard a folk tale that says that, but like the $2 bill, queer is a $2 bill. Hookers were associated with the $2 bill, you know, because you pay in cash. If you're a hooker, $1 bills, ones and twos. So it was just one of those. In fact, personally, my own heretical belief in my initiation, you had to do a heretical act, a list of heretical acts, and in the church. So to me, it was putting a $2 bill on the donation plate. So like injecting queerness like a disease into the church. It's one of those, not really tied to Mother Redcap, but it is. I don't know.
No, child, I did that on my own as a pastor.
Yeah.
I injected my own $2 bill.
It's funny because all of like the most memorable people that I knew in church are queer now. So like we had a pianist and he would play that piano and just slam on those keys. Well, of course he's gay. He's musical.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I can think of all these little gay boys that were in our little nativity play who played all of these parts. And it's like all of the talent in the church comes from us. So it's just very, the idea of poisoning the community or poisoning the communion wine, um, injecting it spiritually with queerness.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few places I'd like to go, but beforehand, you were talking about Mother Redcap destroying other people's livelihood, and there were examples of like the blood into milk, stealing eggs, etc. Was it usually with this idea of ensuring their own survival, or just destroying the other person without necessarily getting anything in return?
I've never really heard anyone, like, no one's questioned it. And of course, I never questioned it as a kid when my grandfather was alive and would talk about her. But I've never really heard it said that it was for her own livelihood. So you take the idea of she's a witch, she's of the devil, she's made a deal, like how. So back in the day, if someone would become famous or run into a sum of money, there was a belief that they made a deal with the devil at the crossroads, right? Like you have someone becomes a famous musician, he's satanic, he made a deal with the devil. So the idea that anyone who is demonic in any way is a little rich. If you have rich people, which I love. I love that the Ozarks was so anti-rich people. But anyway, all that aside, I think that there was this underlying suggestion in all of her folk tales that she had everything she needed. She had no reason to be a prostitute, but she was. She had no reason to steal someone's milk, but she did, because she made a deal with the devil, and he is the king of greed and money and worldly possessions. So she just did it for the fun of it. And I love that. And the idea of blending, she didn't blend, blenders didn't exist, but this just is me putting in my blending someone's child and making a baby oil. What do you gain from that? She just did it for fun. She just was a wicked, evil person. Maybe because she had to be, because everyone hated her, because she was ostracized. So it was just to get back. Or maybe it was just because she was demented. And I don't know. Things to think about. And then there's also the question of, was there ever an actual woman who maybe killed someone's child? And this is where that folktale came from. Was there milk that like had blood in it? Was there a cow's whose udders were bleeding, so that was the fault of a witch? Like, were these things actual real things that happened? Could you actually find blood in your milk and blame a witch? You could.
That I know for a fact, because I had an uncle that was trying to sell a cow, and the cow was giving blood in the milk.
Oh.
And
interesting.
One of my aunts was like, "You can't do that. That's evil."
And unsanitary. Yeah. But all of these magical things, like the idea of the wine turning into transubstantiation. Yeah, transubstantiation, the wine and the bread actually physically turning into blood and flesh in the body once you consume it. Are there physical, real, scientific explanations for these things? No, but can there be like, yeah, there's blood in this cow's milk. This milk that we just had turned sour all of a sudden in our ice box. There may have been a chemical reaction. I'm not a chemist. I don't know.
Sure.
But could it happen? Yeah. But to the Ozarker who is illiterate, uneducated, it's a witch. And it's the woman down the street. It's the girl who looked at me funny in church. She liked my earrings. She wants my money. She's coming for my livelihood. My husband's crops were blighted. It's just very... The witch did it. And then you have the idea of the witch in the later Ozarks after the Back to the Land movement, when more people from around the country were moving here that were removed from the culture. So even more, not really immigrant, but transplant folk tales made their way here. Um, and the idea that the witch is not an actual person, but a spirit. So the Catholic idea of demons and unclean spirits causing harm, the evil eye, made its way here. So it was no longer Mother Redcap or the lady down the street that cursed me. It was the spirit witch or the haint, if you're familiar with that term, the haint. And in Arkansas, we're right above Louisiana. So a lot of hoodoo, voodoo, vodou influence made its way here. The idea of the haint blue, the bottle trees to keep you protected, all of that made its way here. So that's also Ozark folk magic now. The idea that the witch is a spirit, not a person. So that work is worked into modern day covens where you have witch ancestors who are there in spirit. So you could say you have a coven and you're the only person there at the circle because they're all spirits. The witch isn't a real person. Yeah, that's just way off topic.
We've been dancing around some or referring to some Christian and Catholic concepts. You yourself do practice a form of Catholic witchcraft or Christian witchcraft?
Full Catholicism,
accurate?
Folk magic. It's very language terms. Yeah, and people talk about words they like, words they don't like. I go back and forth. But yeah, I do practice within a Catholic worldview. In fact, I think that as witches, you kind of have to, because the point is, if you're working like a trad witch, demonic devil of the devil sense, the whole point is to usurp and overthrow, and to be the opposite end of the church, to be the left versus the right, the dark to their light. You are hurting the church. And to do that, you have to study the church. You have to be in the church. You have to know the church. So a lot of my influence, Catholic influence, is more so done out of heresy instead of actual proper, I'm a folk Catholic. I didn't realize that. I mean, I always knew that, but I didn't really realize that that was not the way most folk Catholics, in quotes, saw it. A lot of them are like, no, I'm just Catholic, but I do things the church doesn't recognize. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what I do. I do it with bad intentions. So like I will use images of the Virgin Mary, whose head that I've dipped in red paint to symbolize Mother Redcap. I use the Catholic imagery. I use the Catholic prayers, the rituals. It's up for grabs, so I take it. And then I also like do pray to the saints in the Virgin Mary, and I have a whole pantheon that I've assembled of them, but they're not really the saints or the Virgin Mary. They're local gods, local spirits, animist representations. It's very eclectic. I don't like that word for myself, but it's very eclectic. It's very kind of setting my own path.
Speaking of local spirits, you mentioned bioregionalism. And how would you define that? And especially in terms of your personal practice and observance of it?
Yeah, bioregional animism. The term, I don't want to say that Aaron Oberon, if you're familiar with them, they are on Instagram. I think they're tagged just Aaron Oberon. They've written a book called Southern Cunning. They're based in Florida. I don't know if they invented the term bioregional animism, but I got it from them. It completely changed my practice. So the idea is that it's in your bioregion. So you learn about the plants, the animals, the politics, even the illnesses that are common there, and you view all of those things as having an influence on your life and the lives of those living there. And you can venerate those spirits, you can work with them, you can just acknowledge them and blame all of your shortcomings on them. It's do what you want. very mess around and find out. Just form your own spiritual beliefs, and go from there. I don't want to say there's one way to practice bioregional animism, because some of us will be more religious with it. Some of us will be more working witchcraft with it. You can worship the oak tree in your backyard. You can utilize its leaves for a spell. Just do what you want. But the idea is that if it's not on your land, it's not in your house. It's not in your practice. And then that also, I say that, but I also like venerate Santa Muerte, who's from Mexico, but we're not going to drag me for that one. Um, that's not really an animist thing. That's more of a Catholic thing. Um, but yeah, she's in the Ozarks too. I've seen images of her around. So that's bio, and it's not really an animism thing. Again, it's just Catholic. But if we're talking about animism, I venerate local gods who I've syncretized with saints. I view the political climate of my landscape as being influenced by the nature of my landscape. Um, so we had a flood here, a really bad flood. We also just had a vote to have a children's homeless shelter, or sorry, not homeless shelter,
A children's home, I guess.
yeah, a children's home. We had a children's home. There was a vote, a movement to have it removed because it brings crime to the area, in quotes. Uh, and it's just weird that we just had a flood around the time of that voting, and a lot of people's houses who were probably Republicans' houses were underwater. The White River flushed in and flushed the whole town, but not the street that this children's home was on. So that's bioregional animism. That is the livelihood, the lives, the politics, the ideas, the beliefs being influenced, impacted, or worked upon by the land. And I use that almost as if I visit somewhere else, if I were to come to one of the Carolinas, South Carolina, for example, I would completely different spirits, completely different bioregion, completely different animals. I'm not from there. Those plants and animal spirits don't recognize me as one of them. I was not born there. Um, it's just like, are they going to work in my favor? Are they going to work against me? Do they like me? I've never left them an offering before. It's just the consciousness, being conscious and aware of your surroundings in a spiritual sense is bioregional animism.
Going further with that political example, as a queer trans person in what I would expect an overly red state, is there an example of that in your work or your experience in bioregional animism?
Yeah, um, well, how do I want to say this? There is someone that I used to date before I came out as trans. And after I came out, he was being very aggressive and like came to my house and was just like doing like vandalism. He broke my windshield. He just because I'm trans. It was so random. Um, and I didn't like do anything magically. I didn't do I didn't do none of that. Don't know why. It didn't work. But a tree that I had left offerings for at his house for before fell and crushed his garage whenever we had a tornado. And I was gassed, a jaw on the floor. Um, and like he was an atheist, so it's not like he was like, you did this, you witch. Like there was none of that. It was just how unfortunate. And that was just one of those moments, like the flood and uh the children's home, just the land, the politics, people who aren't on my side. I'm on the side of the land. So if you're not on my side, you're not on the land side. And I would honestly, I hate to admit it, but I feel like that goes both ways. If I were a staunch Republican, but I give offerings to my oak tree, the oak trees are Republican. Sorry. The spirits don't care. They just follow their own morals. But if there's someone there who is on their side, they're going to be on your side. But as for children, I say that, but the children's home, I don't know. That one was different because it's not like I told a spirit, oh, this children's home. I'm so worried about it. That just happened. I don't know. Spirits work weird in weird ways.
I'm listening to a book right now, like on my commutes to work, and it's called Becoming Animal. And there's an anecdote in there where the author talks about he's had a newborn child, and it's been, observing the house and learning everything about the house. And then he drops off his wife and child, like, to stay with the grandmother or something like that. And he's so excited. He's going to come home to have the house all to himself. And he gets home to the house, and he just feels this overwhelming sense of sadness from the house until he finally says, she's coming home. It's okay. Like, she'll be back in a few days.
Yeah.
And then the house suddenly being like, and in how he didn't even remember that experience because it was so out of his expectations till something like that happened again. But the spirit of the home reacting.
Yeah. The spirits respond to human life and people. I noticed, like, this again can be scientifically explained, but I like to believe it was spiritual. You go on vacation, your plants wither because you didn't water them, you were gone. But aren't they a little sad you're gone? Like, it's more emotional, it's more tangible. They're like personified to me.
And you can even go that direction with your pets.
Yeah. Very
I mean,
much.
if you
And not
think about-
just the pet, but like the archetype. So, like, I have a pet frog. So niche. I'm so quirky. I know.
Love it.
But I have a pet frog. And not that she misses me because she doesn't care, but like the spirit of the frog. I feel like there's a connection just because I'm caring for one of them. There is the archetype.
I have a pet spider, so don't worry about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's cool. I thought about getting a tarantula. So.
Mine's a jumping spider.
Oh, my friend has a pet jumping spider. They're so cute.
But yeah, I do understand that part of it, just based on that.
When you're an animist, it ranges from, oh yeah, this makes sense. Nature's fighting back. Humans are awful. But then there's also like like, these are my friends. It's kind of like an imaginary friend type deal, and it makes you sound a little woo-woo.
Sometimes we have to be woo-woo.
Yeah.
Growing up, we kind of had the opposite experience where my mom brought a little cactus pad back from Mexico, and it grew in the house until it reached a certain point, and then it never grew again. And we figured, okay, that's about all it's going to do because it's inside and it's potted and all this stuff. And then we went out of town for a week. And we came back and it had grown like another 1.5 feet.
Oh my gosh. They also just like cacti. Well, actually, no, I can't say that. I've never had one, but like a succulent. They stretch when they don't have enough sunlight. So it's just like, do you miss the sun? You're telling me that you want more sunlight? Okay. That is what they're doing, but also no, that's just nature. But also, if nature's alive, because you're an animist, it's just lots of back and forth. Because at the end of the day, I have a degree. I'm very like school minded, but I'm also a witch, and the two do not connect. So I'm constantly in my head like, am I like having a spiritual experience, or is this spiritual psychosis? Sometimes it's both.
What reminds you of the myth of Inanna in the story of Mother Redcap?
Well, specifically, the idea of her like going to hell. So in the Ozarks, we have an actual place called Hell. It's not a city anymore. No one lives there, but it used to be on the map, Hell, Arkansas. And the belief was that Mother Redcap was from there. I didn't mention that earlier. So the Inanna's descent into the underworld, and also Mother Redcap going to hell, and coming back. She transforms into a bird, a pileated woodpecker, and she flies over the city of Hell, Arkansas, and curses everyone that lives there. And it's not really tied in with Inanna, but I used to be a Sumerian reconstructionist and worshipped the goddess Inanna. So coming to traditional witchcraft and functioning in an Ozark method, I saw those connections, the idea of being red, the idea of being queer. Just very similar spirits in my mind. Yeah, but nothing important. Just a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
I love that. That's like the like modern cinematic version of Inanna's myth, where they set it in the South and she goes to Hell, Arkansas.
Yeah, she goes to Hell, Arkansas,
right, on a road trip.
Yeah, and she comes back.
Has to give up all her belongings on the way. She gets robbed.
Yeah, she does. And they burn her at the stake. Just like how they hung Inanna on the hook. Yeah, lots of little connections there. Just oppression, no matter the culture or the time period, all functions the same way, I guess you could say. Yeah, I see all of these weird connections, and I thought that I was like, no, surely Inanna is not in like a very watered down modern American form coming to me as Mother Redcap. Surely not. But it always comes back. It always is mentioned by someone. I don't know. I'm not going to dig into that any further, but.
Was there anything about the tale that we did not get to that you were hoping to discuss while we were together today?
No, I think I wish I had more. I love talking.
It was amazing. It was a lot of information. And I know you said you love how she's secret and she's almost like a closed part of your coven in a sense.
Yeah.
But then you also do kind of wish she was more popular.
Yeah.
Is there like, do you want people to hear this, like, to feel a little bit called to experiment with her?
Yeah,
or something,
absolutely. In fact, I want more friends that work with her or are wanting to work with her. They're not in my coven, because it can get a little like echo chambery, because we all have the same beliefs and same experiences. So I would love for someone else to experiment and then like message me on Instagram. I would love to hear all about it. I also would really love to hear about an Indigenous person who works with her as an Indigenous spirit and hear about their experiences or any visions they have. That would be really cool. There also may be some Indigenous folklore there that I'm not aware of. There may be a Mother Redcap who is an actual Osage spirit. Obviously there's not, but like to my knowledge. But what if there is? I don't know. What if there is a goddess of some sort that was known to have red hair or wore a red hat? We know that a lot of chiefs wore red hats in a lot of Indigenous cultures. So I would love to hear that perspective.
I love this idea of it being an audacity almost too, like especially when she becomes the Lord God bird, and it's like just this big bird that's loud because it's knocking on things, and then has the audacity to have this big red hair as well.
It's very dramatic. It's very drag queen. Big hair, loud mouth. I love it. I feel like the point, like, it all comes back to her whole purpose is to disrupt people, to cause rifts in your social life, your financial life, your family, your church. She is just chaos. Just like that bird. It's the perfect personification. Because we have a lot of woodpeckers around here, obviously not that same kind because they're extinct. Thankfully, they're horrifying. But no, seriously, we have nature centers around here that have like stuffed versions of that bird. Massive, scary.
I have to go.
But the woodpeckers we have now, the pileated woodpecker, they're just something about them. You just hate them. You just want them to die. You want to shoot it. They're so loud. They just grate on your nerves, but also they're so beautiful. And when they're not pecking in the middle of the night, you just want to stare at it and you just want to see them. And I think that's the witch. She's a nuisance, but she's also so glamorous, and you love her. You can't help but love her. She's beautiful. Yeah.
That is one of the best description I think I've heard of the allure of the witch, and maybe why we're called to that allure of the witch.
I feel like that's like queerness. Like, you want to be glamorous and beautiful, but you also like hate society and how it treats you. So you want to be a nuisance too. That's the witch. Yeah. But sorry, back to what you were saying.
No, you got me. That's exactly it.
Pebble in the shoe.
Exactly it. Are there any projects you're working on that you'd like people to know about, to support you on, or just to visit what you're sporadically putting on the IG?
Yeah. I want to be more active on Threads. Probably won't happen, but I'd like to. But anyway, I'm working on my blog, which, like, I say blog, it's literally just a Tumblr page. But I'm going to be updating that more. I'm also thinking about writing a little, like, not really a book, but just like a little something. Just about the devil, the green devil. You guys had an episode about, like, the devil and green or like a green suit or something. There's a green devil in the Ozarks as well. So, like, I'm interested in writing about that. I've considered making a class. Like, this is very, like, not even considered, like, actually working and doing it. It's just been a thought in the back of my head lately, making a class about Ozark traditional witchcraft, and to kind of be like the antithesis to what Brandon Weston is doing in a very lovely we're not enemies. I love Brandon, but, like, Brandon's a healer. I'm not.
Compliment.
Yes, compliment. Brandon is a healer and I'm not. And I would love to take everything that he has said, everything that I do, and just, like, twist it and be like, okay, it's like Brandon says this, I say this, but we're still both working in the Ozark fashion. Yeah, I love that. I love the difference between me and Brandon, because we're not that close, but the few times we've spoken, he'll say something, I'll be like, I've never thought of that before, and then I'll say something and he'll be like, wow, that's truly awful. But I think that it would be really cool to make an Ozark traditional witchcraft video, and of course it wouldn't be scholarly in the least. It would just be what my coven does and what I do, but be fun. People would pay for it, and I love money.
That's useful. Dave, your book will be out by the time that this ever airs. And I don't know if you have anything else going on, but go ahead and tell everybody what you want them to know about in the future.
So my book does release February 20th, which, like you said, will be passed by this broadcast, called The Simple Magic of Wild Things. And it is my journey as a Southern male witch. And I've got Sacred Space Conference coming up at the end of March. I'll be teaching my class on healing ancestral trauma. And then Mystic South, I'm planning on being a part of it in July.
Okay.
And got quite a few podcasts coming up. I don't have a list of those yet, but do have quite a few podcasts coming up. So going to be a busy 2024 here. But awesome. if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, you can go to rebelsatori.com, and you can look for The Simple Magic of Wild Things. And my name, Dave Gaddy.
And is the healing yourself with ancestor work, is that online as well, or will that be, is that like conference in person only?
Right now it's in person only, but I will be offering it eventually through a Patreon. Okay. I've got quite a few classes that I'll be offering through a Patreon at some point.
Wonderful. Well, we've been on a long and winding road through this story with this figure, Mother Redcap. And as we continue our journeys, until we meet again, may all your travels be filled with wonder. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It was so much fun.
How do I stop?